At Richborough in Kent, a ruined Roman fort contains one of the most intriguing archaeological mysteries in Britain, an enormous concrete platform surmounted by a cross. Over centuries, both scholars and robbers have dug deep inside it to search for tombs and treasure. But this was no mausoleum. Research has revealed that nearly 2,000 years ago, the Romans built an extraordinary structure here.
Anyone looking at the building would have been dazzled by white marble, blinded by the sun bouncing off bronze and gilt statuary, and also overwhelmed by the magnificence, opulence, and sheer arrogant size of the structure.
A visitor perhaps wouldn't have been aware that Britain was actually so developed as it was. They wouldn't have expected great architecture, and there was great architecture towering above them in a stunning way.
Building like that would be utterly unprecedented, and it really is a statement, I suppose, of intent, what the Romans are going to do once they get ashore.
The Roman invasion of AD 43 changed the face of Britain. Yet ancient histories never revealed where the soldiers landed. Could Richborough shed new light on this turning point in our history? Richborough is one of over 400 sites that English Heritage manages. I've only recently become chief executive of the organisation, and this is my first chance to visit. This is a remarkable and beautiful place. It's certainly not the most visited of our sites, or the best known, but perhaps it should be. Perhaps people should know it as well as Stonehenge or the Tower of London. For 2,000 years ago, it had a very special status at the heart of the Roman Empire. The giant concrete platform is Richborough's greatest mystery. It is absolutely vast. One thing one learns about working with monuments like this is that nothing happens by chance. There's always a reason for it. An economic reason, a social reason, a political reason, and sometimes just a practical reason. What is the reason for this? That is the question that we've got to answer if we're going to put Richborough back at the heart of the nation's history. For centuries, scholars have puzzled over Richborough. Burlington House in central London is the home of the Society of Antiquaries. I started my search for clues in its magnificent library. The earliest record I found was by John Leland, who visited sometime around 1535. He discovered that the concrete platform was already a magnet for grave robbers.
Not far is a cave where men have sought and digged for treasure. I saw it by candle within. It was so straight that I had no mind to creep far in.
'18th century antiquarians were inspired by the crumbling walls of the Roman fort. Then, the only visible feature within the walls was the concrete platform and its cross. Today, the site looks very different. The excavations conducted here have revealed the particular significance of Richborough to the Romans. It looks a bit like a battle site, and there's obviously been some serious archaeology going on here.
Absolutely, yes. In the night between 1922 and 1938, excavation of the interior of the fort took away something like a couple of metres, and then went down into all the deeper areas, the ditches and so forth, of the phases of 400 years of Roman occupation. So what you see is really the site laid out in as many different phases as possible. They're trying to convey as much information by the way it's sort of sculpted as they possibly can.
It's a massive excavation, isn't it? I mean, it's absolutely huge. Who arranged it and how was it paid for? I mean, it's a vast undertaking.
Yeah, it was arranged and paid for by the Society of Antiquaries of London. Of course, it's a period of mass unemployment, so the labour force is coming from the locality, unskilled in archaeology at least. And they even had a railway track, a light railway track. The guys were throwing the spoil into railway trucks, pushing them down the track and away off to dump down the banksides in different places.
I mean, if that happened today, it would be swarming with the public. They'd be fascinated. I mean, was the public interested? I mean, did it get in the newspapers and stuff?
It certainly got in the papers, and it got onto film as well. It's the beginning of the era of mass interest in archaeology, just at the very beginning of it.
The Richborough excavations uncovered one of the largest collections of Roman artefacts found in Britain. The archaeologist in charge was Jocelyn Bush-Fox.
Bush-Fox ran some of the biggest excavations of British sites in the 20th century and systematically worked through and published things within a year or so of doing the work. A very considerable and very thoughtful excavator whose work has really stood the test of time.
Very quickly, Bush-Fox realised that Richborough might answer one of the big questions about early Roman Britain. AD 43, the largest invasion in British history, is where the textbooks begin. It's seen as a key moment marking a new era of civilization and organisation. The invasion was launched by Rome's determined new emperor, Claudius.
What Claudius is looking for is a way of establishing himself as a leader of the army and as a military general. What Britain provides is an opportunity to gain the military success that he needs politically.
The main account of the Roman invasion by Cassius Dio is sparse.
They put into the island, meeting no opposition. The Britons did not expect them to arrive, and they had not mustered their forces.
None of the Roman sources revealed where Claudius's 40,000 troops had landed. Today, Richborough is over 2 miles from the sea. It's hard to believe that it might once have been the target of an invasion fleet. But appearances are deceptive. At the foot of the cliff below the site, English Heritage has been taking core samples. These can determine how the environment has changed over time.
One of the most important questions about Richborough is where the sea was in Roman times relative to the cliff here. And we've been looking at the deposits to see how they were formed. Were they formed on land, were they formed underwater? And also to try to get some idea of how old they are, how long they took to form.
Fragments of root from the core sample were sent for radiocarbon dating. The results revealed that the sea had been here until as recently as the 15th century. So we now know that in AD 43, Richborough was on the edge of the Wonsum, a wide sea channel. To the west, a series of shingle banks provided protection from channel storms. In the northeast, the Wonsum provided safe passage to the key trading route of the Thames estuary.
What the Wonsum Channel provides is a way that brings you in sheltered conditions ashore relatively quickly onto dry land with a series of creeks and so on where you can draw the boats up on the shore. And that's the key point with Richborough.
In 1932, Bush Fox revealed the first solid evidence that Richborough might be linked with the Claudian invasion. Within the fort walls, he found 2 parallel ditches.
This is actually the earliest thing that Bush Fox found on the site. There's a pair of ditches, a classic Roman sort of V-shaped profile with a square slot dug in the bottom, known as an ankle breaker. So if you jumped into this, you'd just turn your ankle in the slot at the bottom. And a rampart on this side. So, you know, a real defensive structure, which Bush Fox actually interpreted as a hastily erected bridgehead camp for the invasion army of AD 43.
And so the sea's over there?
Yes, the sea's over there, and this is a landward defence, so it's defending effectively what's on the beach at this point.
And so that's the reason why he thought that this was a landing place for the Roman army?
That's right.
Could the Richborough ditches have once protected the Roman invasion fleet? Bush Fox needed to prove they dated from AD 43. That was no easy task, although there were tantalising clues. Excavations around the ditches uncovered a number of coins dating from Claudius's reign. There were also fragments of a high-quality pottery known as Samian.
This is some of the Samian that Bush Fox found in his Claudian conquest period ditch at Richborough. It's a carinated bowl, decorated Samian bowl, absolutely typical of the mid-1st century AD. It's very finely moulded here. You can see the leaf decoration and the tendrils. But the interesting thing to me here is that the bowl looks new, and of course it isn't new because it's nearly 2,000 years old, but the bowl seems to have had very little use. There's no wear around the rim, and on the bottom here, on the base, I can see markings from the bowl underneath it in the kiln. It doesn't look as if the base has ever been worn away on tables or anything like that. So I suspect Bush Fox was quite right about thinking that this bowl was relatively new and Claudian in date when it was lost. The other key point to it here is the potter's stamp Syniceo, and that's very clearly stamped in the base of the pot, and we know from other sites that Syniceo was working at around that time.
Bush Fox's finds did suggest an early Roman presence at Richborough, but they were not conclusive proof of an invasion here.
Archaeologists can't date to the nearest month. Quite often we can't date to the nearest year. So although we can say that these military installations at Richborough belong to the Claudian period, roughly the time of the invasion, that's as far as we can go. Thereafter, it's speculation.
There is an alternative to the theory that the Romans first landed here in Kent, and it stems from one of the most exciting archaeological discoveries of the 20th century.
In 1960, workmen laying a water main in Sussex uncovered ancient remains. These exquisite classical mosaics ornament a palace at Fishbourne, which once covered some 10 acres. It was probably built for Togidubnus, the king of the local tribe and a loyal ally of Rome.
The very fact that the Romans encouraged the palace to be built here in the 70s of the 1st century suggests that there was something special perhaps about the site and about the region.
Professor Cunliffe led the Fishbourne excavations. Beneath the mosaics, he found evidence of an early Roman military presence. He now believes that Sussex, rather than Kent, may have been the site chosen by the Romans for their invasion.
They had direct links to the ruling household of this area. So that politically would have been quite a sensible place to land. You don't land in enemy territory, you land in friendly territory and then move out into enemy territory.
Professor Cunliffe also thinks that Sussex offered a better haven than Kent for the vast Roman fleet, an estimated 1,000 ships.
You needed a lot of coast to offload them on. The indented nature of these harbours here provided safe havens once you're in, well protected, and enabled you to offload your troops along a wide front rather than on a very narrow front. So I think one could argue that there were real advantages which enable you to get into the hinterland quite quickly.
Archaeology has not yet resolved exactly where the Romans landed. But the debate has been revived by new research from a surprising perspective. Gerald Grange has a doctorate in maritime archaeology and a passion for sailing. He's compared the sea routes the Romans might have chosen.
Over the years, we've done cross-channel passages from Dover to Calais, Boulogne. We've been down to the Normandy coast, down to the Channel Islands, and crossed to the Solent, so we know the Solent as well as this area.
Grange believes that the Roman view of the world made them wary of channel crossings.
Around their world was the great river ocean, which was the Atlantic Ocean, the North Sea, etc., etc. And it really was, in Roman terms, taking on all sorts of taboos to cross such thresholds. Before the invasion fleet of AD 43 left, we're told that the legionaries mutinied. They weren't going to cross the channel. They weren't going to this barbarian land, the other side of this unknown ocean.
But this fear of long sea journeys was not the only factor that the Romans would have taken into account in planning their passage from Boulogne. Dr. Grange believes their strategy would have been influenced by the design of Roman ships.
The invasion fleet would have been made up of warships, oared ships with auxiliary sail, faster and more manoeuvrable than the basic transport ships which brought the bulk of the legionaries and their supplies across. The transports, we believe, would have been single sail, square rigged ships, and they basically would only sail downwind.
Modern yachts can make progress against the wind by tacking.
Stand by the tack. Okay, let it go.
What did you say?
Let it go.
Lacking this ability, the Roman transports would have needed a favourable wind. But in the English Channel, the prevailing winds are from the west. This would have made the 95-mile crossing to the Fishbourne area a hazardous business. In contrast, those same prevailing winds would have aided the 40-mile journey to Richborough. Dr. Grange estimated that it would have taken the Romans between 9 and 16 hours to get to Richborough. But to sail to Fishbourne would have taken well over 2 days.
The maritime arguments about where the Romans landed in AD 43 are so strongly in favour of Richborough that only the discovery of a lost manuscript would actually prove me wrong.
Wherever the Romans actually landed, Richborough would become central to their strategy after the invasion. In the southern part of the site, Bush Fox excavated rows of discoloured impressions in the earth. They implied the foundations of a distinctive kind of military building.
What Bush Fox found in this area here were discolorations in the soil, pattern of discolorations, which represent the slots and post holes from the timbers of a really big timber building, or several really large timber buildings, which were instantly recognisable from their shape and from their form as grain stores, granaries, of the sort of shape familiar from any Roman fort throughout the empire. These are military granaries.
Classics.
Absolute
Roman
classic.
classics,
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they're pretty massive. I mean, that must tell us something about the sort of status and use of this place.
Absolutely. They're not the only two within the area either. More were found, and I think this means that what we've got is a major military installation. It's effectively a supply base. Corn's coming in from the continent, being dropped off here, and then transshipped perhaps to other ships that are following the army up north as it goes forward and conquers more and more of the province through the 60s and 70s.
It's a pretty big military depot, essentially.
It's a big operation, yes.
Richborough flourished as a supply depot. Numerous military artefacts excavated by bush fox confirmed its important role in the army's campaign of conquest. These corroded pieces of iron and bronze are, in fact, the cheek piece from a Roman helmet and its ornamental headband. And, most exciting of all, an iron washer from one of the Roman army's most dreaded weapons. The washer formed part of the front assembly of the catapulta. When tightened, it produced enough tension in a skein of rope to propel a bolt some 300 yards.
The production of and the maintenance of these bigger items of artillery is really very important for the success of the Roman army. And seeing parts of one at Richborough really reinforces this idea of it being the military supply base for the invading army.
But it's now becoming clear that Richborough was far more than just a military depot. English Heritage has recently conducted a geophysical survey of the area around the fort. The magnetometer detected tiny variations in the Earth's magnetic field to build up a picture of features hidden beneath the Earth. The results were startling. The survey revealed a lost town of some 50 acres.
There are streets, there are buildings, there are enclosures in differing concentrations and of differing types. But it shows that the Roman settlement of Richborough is enormously more extensive than was demonstrated by any earlier work.
The new geophysical surveys are stunning. There are temples, there is a theatre. It is a great harbour city, a great harbour town.
It wasn't just a military base, an administrative base. There were people living and working here, and presumably there'd been more settlement around they'd have to have connected with.
The Roman development of Richborough brought prosperity to this part of Kent. At Minster, just across the Wantsum Channel, excavations are revealing the remains of a splendid villa.
Once that had been a major complex of very important buildings. We've got Roman mosaic fragments, we've got some very fine Roman painted wall plaster and ceiling plaster. The structural remains include underfloor heating, a hypercore system, and of course the bathhouse, which is always a good indication of a fine Roman complex.
Produce from the fertile land here could now be exported from the thriving port nearby.
Regular barges of grain would leave the farm estate. That produce could be brought across to Richborough, sold perhaps to the townsfolk who lived here, or maybe sent through the port and away to the continent, or maybe further up north in Britain. So I rather think that perhaps there's a very clear and close relationship between the town at Richborough and the villa at Minster.
What all this research shows us is that Richborough grew steadily after the invasion to become a major Roman town. And yet, sometime around AD80, a space was cleared right here in the centre of the town, and on it was built this massive concrete structure. What on earth was it?
One of the logical things to think about was it was a mausoleum of some sort, and there was an important burial in there, or there was treasure in there. It was the strong room at the time of the invasion, perhaps, or later. So there was a desire to find out what was inside.
But those who tried to break in received a rude shock. In 1771, a Mr. Boys of Sandwich recorded,
I dug below the building and got in about 11 feet underneath it. I found it to be like a solid rock, impenetrable by any instrument whatever.
The Richborough concrete was composed of heavy beach pebbles covered by a lime mortar. It was both strong and could set in damp conditions.
That hydraulic concrete, which was key for the development of harbours and so forth, was one of the real great engineering successes of the Romans, and clearly has been used in this type of foundation at Richborough.
In September 1931, Bushfox turned to a diviner for help. He predicted that the concrete contained a central chamber and produced a plan to illustrate his theory. So, just like his predecessors, Bushfox decided to investigate. A shaft was sunk and tunnelling began. No tomb was found, but the research gave the first clue to the purpose of the great mass of concrete. The shaft has been sealed since 1975 because of the risk of it collapsing. But 21st century technology provides a new chance to explore the tunnels. This remote camera, more commonly used in the construction industry, sends video pictures back to a command vehicle. Jonathan Code last saw these tunnels 25 years ago.
Underneath the great foundation in the centre of Richborough, which is supporting the sides.
He gave me a guided tour from the comfort of the van.
But I think if the camera can go either left or right here, and you'll see this narrow passage cut underneath the flange of the exterior.
Right, so this is the tunnel we're going round. Can it go down further?
If you can swivel that round to the right, what you're seeing here now on the left is the edge of the foundations going down.
Looks like we're about to bump into it. Ah! No.
Interactive archaeology here.
This is more like it.
Yes.
I assume we're seeing that the foundations in section there, and you can see how it's made up, can't you?
Yes, you can. You can see how the flints there have been laid in layers and mortared in.
I mean, it's built, to my eyes, incredibly high quality. I mean, it's built absolutely beautifully.
Well, as far as we know, they dug down, and there were two sort of approach ramps cut down through the subsoil here, which is very sandy soil, so that the Roman masons could come in and do this extremely high quality job. And it is very, very hard Roman mortar we're looking at here. And at the end you can see a concrete blocking where the passage was sealed off because of concerns.
It looks like the sort of entrance to Tutankhamun's tomb or something, doesn't it? When someone has removed the block.
Yes,
so it's always desperate to go down and look. But there's nothing behind there, is there? It's just more foundation.
There's more foundation, bits of fallen rubble where it has slumped in over the years.
Yeah, what a shame. So can we back out now and see where that metal grill was? Is there any way we can look down in there and sort of get some sense of the depth of it? Because we're on a level here. So there's the metal grill.
Yep.
Now it's a question of whether we can just peer around
side of that. There we go.
There we go.
Gosh, yeah, so there is really quite a
But it's quite
hole
a
there,
deep shaft down there. One of the great mysteries of this is just how deep these foundations went, which is why we've got these tunnels here, or why they were excavated, to give early antiquarians an idea of what on earth this could have been.
So the big question is, how deep were they?
Well, eventually, after a lot of effort, the footings here were bottomed out at about 30 feet deep.
30 feet? That's enormously deep.
It is enormously deep.
The great depth of the concrete could only lead to one conclusion.
The excavations of the 20s and 30s were crucial in showing us what the real nature of that foundation was. That it is a vast slab of concrete plugged down into this rather dodgy sand. And it was quite clear that it had a very heavy structure on it.
But what structure could have merited such an enormous foundation? The clues came from studying the 3rd century fort walls that surround the site.
We're standing on the West Gate, the site of the West Gate. Watling Street runs out to London, straight in front of us here. Bush Fox was of the opinion that the large sandstone blocks here, and some limestone blocks that are scattered around as well, actually were reused from the structure in the middle.
Right, I see where you put me here. And what about these slots and things here? Is this all evidence for the reuse and what you interpreted?
Yes, I think so. We've got clamp holes here which tie, iron clamps leaded into the stone to tie two stones together. We've also got these things called Lewis holes, which, if you feel them there, you can see it slanting back.
Oh yeah, these are these things where you put it and it goes like that,
that's
and
right.
as you lift it, it digs
tightens
in further.
up. Yeah, that's right. It's the evidence for lifting gear.
So his theory was that these walls were largely made up of material taken from the foundation.
Yeah, and there's one other particular piece of evidence for that I'd like to show you.
Okay.
Here it is, just up here in the wall.
Oh my goodness, it's enormous. What is it?
It's the sculpture of the hindquarters and the body of a lion.
It's really quite good, isn't it?
It's very good indeed. It's made in oolitic limestone. And again, the interpretation is that it's coming from the structure in the centre of the site.
Fragments of marble veneer from the monument that once stood on top of the foundation are the final clue to its form. In 1952, Professor Sir Ian Richmond finally realised what all the evidence pointed to. In a flash of inspiration, he grasped the real nature of the cross in the centre. What if it represented infill rather than foundation? Richmond reasoned that the area around the cross was the real base of the structure. 4 massive stone piers had once stood here. The cross itself was actually a passage through a quadriphons or 4-way arch.
Was everyone completely amazed? I mean, did people believe him?
Well, they were and they weren't, in a sense. As soon as he'd said it, a bit like Darwin, to many people it was obvious. Why didn't I think of it? And that sort of thing. But he was one of these people, though he was basically based in Britain and was a Romano-British archaeologist, he had this very wide background as well, and he knew what arches looked like in different parts of the Roman Empire, which of course you just didn't have in Britain. This is a model that was actually made just after Richmond's idea, but unfortunately Richmond died in 1965, and so the work was taken over by Donald Strong, who was another very fine professor of Roman archaeology and architecture.
So how did we get from the pile of stones here to this charming little model?
Well, what Donald actually did was to look for the really key pieces, and here is one of them, and to see that it's actually curved, and was straight away able to say, well, this is clearly part of an arch. And so where would you get an arch? Well, here. And as it happens, the diameter of this arch, which you can work out obviously again on paper, is about 23 feet, and that fits perfectly with the gap between the two.
Brilliant. So he's worked out what the plan is, and in a sense that's the easy bit, isn't it? Because the difficult part is working out what the elevations are, and I assume that what he tried to do was to try and work on the basis that Roman buildings are built on a very strict set of rules of proportion, and if you can find out one dimension, it's like cracking the code and you can unravel the whole of the rest of the building.
Exactly that. And the key element you need are the diameters of the columns.
Of one of these.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
And so here we actually have a bit, and you can see this is also curved.
Yes,
round
yes,
here.
yes, it is,
and
yeah.
this comes from one of the columns, and in fact, again, we can say this is 4 feet in diameter, this column. Right. The height of the column is going to be 9 times the diameter, so that makes it immediately 36 feet.
So that column there is 36 feet high, and that allows you to work out the rest.
Yes, because the plinth is a third, as is the entablature, that's the area above the capitals here.
Okay.
So that's 12 feet for each of those.
That's 12 there.
For the plinth.
Plus
36 for the columns, and another 12 feet for the entablature up here, up to the cornice, and then you put on the top this enormous great block, which is called the attic, that everybody still has upstairs in their house, and this is about another 20 feet.
So you add that together, and you get something enormous. What do you get?
You get 86 feet, which is a huge height.
That's astonishingly big. I mean, how does that compare to other arches elsewhere in the Roman Empire? Is it a small one? Big one?
It's immediately one of the biggest. It's straight away, it's quite clear that this is one of the largest monumental arches anywhere in the Roman Empire.
The planning and construction of such an important monument would have taken many years. All the archaeology can tell us is that it was put up between around AD 80 to 90. The work would have probably been carried out under the supervision of the army.
The Roman army did all sorts of jobs that today we've distributed amongst all sorts of different groups. It was the way in which Roman civilization and administration was disseminated throughout the Roman world. There's one instance in North Africa where a town messes up its aqueduct facilities. Even though it had been a Roman province for nearly 100 years, they had to call in a retired Roman military surveyor to sort out the work.
But many of the craftsmen who worked the enormous quantities of stone and marble would probably not have been military men.
There will have been an absolute hive of activity, probably to some extent being coordinated and organised by the army, but almost certainly made up of large numbers of civilian craftsmen, maybe shipped in from Gaul or even Italy.
You've got many, many people working in a great variety of different skills. There's quarrying the stone, dressing it down in situ. The core stones lifted into place, so you've got lifting gear, cranes, the tapping of the hammers of the masons. Obviously the work will be staged, but there's a huge number of skills involved in putting this thing up, and most of it is going to be done on site.
An estimated 20,000 tons of stone formed the core of the arch, representing some 41,000 wagon loads. It was the only building in Roman Britain believed to have been entirely covered in marble.
Richborough Monument.
The source of the Richborough marble reveals the full significance of the building project.
Carrara Quarry.
At Southampton University, Dr. David Williams conducted a method test to see if spectrographic analysis could identify where the marble had come from.
St. Beat Quarry.
All white marbles contain similar crystals like calcite and dolomite. So when you actually look at white marbles, they all seem very, very similar by eye. So the problem is actually differentiating between them and say, this comes from here and that comes from somewhere else. So quite often we need some scientific analysis. Mount Pentelicon quarry. Spectrographic analysis can actually pick up different brightnesses and analyse them and differentiate between those marbles. Thasos quarry.
The marble from Richborough was compared to samples from Turkey, Greece, France and Italy. The Richborough fragment displayed the same signature as the Italian marble from Carrara.
This was an imperial quarry. It was owned by the emperor, and instruction must have come from the imperial household to Carrara for the marble to be shipped off, possibly cut to some extent before it went. So there's that imperial connection there.
It has been estimated that nearly 400 tons of Carrara marble would have been needed to cover the arch, but only a small fraction of it has survived. In the 3rd century, southeast England was threatened by pirates. The Great Arch was destroyed, the stone reused to build the fort walls around Richborough. Even the marble was burned in kilns to produce lime, the essential ingredient in mortar. But although so little survives, there is evidence from other arches to suggest it may have been richly ornamented. In 1975, archaeologists excavated the blocks of a London arch that had been reused in the Roman riverside wall.
Arches such as this were not decorated purely for the fun of it. In fact, they were great billboards, great placards for whoever designed and commissioned the arch wanted to tell their audience.
The London arch depicted figures of gods associated with commerce. The Richborough arch would have had a different message. In the Roman world, all monuments had a symbolic function. Every detail of the design was important, and even the precise location had meaning. For us to understand why the Romans built a vast arch here, we need to look to the heart of the empire itself. Ancona, Italy. This arch was built some 25 years later than the Richborough one. But Professor Millett believes they share a symbolic meaning.
The Ancona arch is very similar. It's marking the boundary between land and sea, a place where you access Italy from overseas, in the sense that Richborough is the place that you access Britain from the continent.
Ancona's importance as a symbolic gateway between land and sea is represented by its keystones. On the landward side is Italia. Neptune, the god of the oceans, faces the sea.
That's exactly the sort of thing we would expect to see at Richborough, with the faces of the arch having these sacred associations, probably a Britannia on one side and again a Neptune or something appropriate on the other side.
So Richborough would have been the symbolic gateway to Britain, placed at the country's most important port. But was it more than that? Dover Castle houses the only two surviving sculptural marble fragments from Richborough. To the expert eye, it's clear what they once were.
Here is the front of a griffin, which is a lion-like creature with the head of an eagle. And it must have been part of the base decoration of the monument. It's unfortunately headless, and the feet have gone, but the body is superbly carved. The other piece that we have here is even more exciting. It's a head with very long hair, and here is a hat which, although it's very battered, originally had a little bobble on it, and it's what we call a Phrygian hat, an Eastern hat, and was the sort of thing that was worn by the Dacians who lived in what is modern-day Romania. Both pieces would probably have come from the sides of the monument, with this Dacian captive representing the conquest of peoples in the East. And it might well have been matched on the other side by a figure of a Westerner, very probably a Briton.
It now looks as though Richborough was celebrating the might of Rome.
Power politics are really expressed through these monuments. This is something that is talking about the emperor's prestige, his achievements and his beneficence in a sacred context, and sort of real huge markers of imperial power.
At Richborough, the most impressive symbol of the emperor's prestige would have towered high above the marble sculptures to crown the arch. Fragments of bronze excavated from around the arch have been examined by Dana Goodburn Brown. The collection is small, but it is of unique importance.
Well, we've got fragments of what appears to have been a very large monumental sculpture. This appears to me to be a section of an arm. It's quite wonderful because it has little hollows here from patching. So I know that this has been finished off. It's not a miscast sculpture that didn't work and was broken up and thrown into a pit. It actually, a lot of work has gone into finishing this.
Dana's colleague, Andrew Lacey, is a sculptor who specialises in ancient bronze casting techniques. At Richborough, the Romans appear to have used an indirect casting method.
They would have started with a sculpture and then taken a mold of that sculpture and then made a wax from that mold rather than modeling it directly. And that's sort of a labor-saving thing and also can make it be more standardized.
A wax copy of a sculpture would have been covered and filled with plaster. The wax would then have been burned out, leaving a void for the molten bronze.
It is an incredible feat. You've got moulds which are very delicate, weigh huge amounts which have got to be buried in the earth. You need a lot of people around working furnaces and dealing with waxes and dealing with plaster and so on and so forth. So it's a big operation. There's a lot of logistics involved in it.
Casting a small sculpture is a precarious undertaking. The Richborough bronze would have been massive, making the process even more difficult.
What it seems likely that they've done is to actually cast it in Italy itself, in a big foundry, and had a team of people there doing it, and then sending out the actual sculpture, rather than trying to send moulds or teams of people out with it.
After a few minutes to cool, it was time to see whether the casting had worked. The delicate shape of the hand slowly emerged from the plaster. But the quality of the bronze was not quite what I'd expected.
Now this hand here, oh golly, it's really heavy, isn't it? When it comes out of the mould, it looks as if it's blistered and got sores on it. What happens to all that?
All this, really nasty stuff is actually quite superficial. So if you take chisels to that and take files to it and actually take the surface back, take all those oxide layers back, after a few days you get to this sort of standard where you've actually got it brightly burnished. We've got air bubbles, holes in the casting. you actually gouge those out, making them into regular shapes and put patches in.
And that's what you're starting to do there, is it, with that?
That's it, yeah. And I think that's what we see with the Richborough ones, is that they're covered in patches. But the final effect is actually amazing because you see a perfect surface. You don't see any of these flaws.
The Richborough bronze fragments include a piece of horse's mane, a portion of cloak fabric, and a brightly gilded section of cuirass or armour. For Martin Hennig, the evidence all points to a mounted emperor.
The statue would have been very like the famous statue of Marcus Aurelius, which you can see in Rome to this day. Marcus Aurelius' statue is only some 50 years later than our statue, so it perhaps gives a very good idea of what our statue looked like.
The statue must have taken the monument to over 90 feet. It would have been visible for many miles.
I think this was probably more important even than the arch itself. People coming to Richborough would see this great gleaming figure above them, and in a sense the arch will then have commemorated him.
But which emperor did the bronze commemorate? The Richborough arch would once have had an inscription revealing who had commissioned it and why. Only fragments of that inscription survive. But even these tiny pieces from one of the smaller panels of the arch give us a lead.
This is really the most tantalising piece of inscription from the Richborough arch because it's the only bit we can get some words out of. It starts here with the letter D, then I, then V, and Roman inscriptions are so formulaic. We know that after that will have come the letter I and probably F. That's Divi Filius, son of the deified, which means it's part of a text an emperor would have used to show his descent from a deified predecessor, his father perhaps, an emperor who had been turned into a god. Up at the top here, we have the bottom of the letter M. And all these inscriptions are so formulaic, we can be pretty sure that this probably comes from IMP, the abbreviation for the word imp or imperator, which means Roman emperor. So it's the Roman emperor so-and-so, son of a deified predecessor.
This narrows the field. We know that the arch was built after AD80, so the deified emperor is likely to have been Vespasian, who died in AD 79. The monument was probably constructed by one of his sons.
There's no doubt that Domitian is the strongest candidate. Not only was he in power at the time we believe archaeologically the arch was built, it was also during his reign that his governor Agricola in Britain took Roman power to its furthest extent by taking the army all the way up the east coast of Scotland, and he even circumnavigated Britain. Domitian would have been delighted to take credit for all that activity, so there's every likelihood that he wanted to mark his imperial control of Britain with an arch.
Domitian ruled from AD 81 to AD 96.
We do know that he went around in Rome erecting an uncommonly large number of arches because Suetonius, the Roman historian, tells us this. In fact, somebody wrote a graffiti on one of the arches saying, "Enough already."
Unlike his father, Domitian was not a popular emperor.
He was paranoid, cruel, and his reputation became worse and worse throughout his reign. On his death, he was subjected to something the Romans called damnatio memoriae, damned memory. There was an actual campaign to go out and destroy statues of him and smash up any inscription with his name on it. As a result, there is no inscription in Britain that names Domitian.
Whichever emperor was responsible, many archaeologists believe that the arch adds weight to the argument that the Romans invaded Britain at Richborough.
I think there's a very good chance that Richborough marks the point of the invasion, because one of the key things in the way that Roman emperors presented themselves was in relation to the past history, in particular trying to make links back to earlier emperors, in this case back to Claudius's invasion. And that would give a natural context for placing the arch at the point where the Roman army of Claudius originally invaded.
There must have been some powerful reason to put such a thing at Richborough, and it may well be that they're putting it deliberately at the place where the whole thing started. So you've got the completion celebrated effectively at the beginning.
I have come to appreciate just how important Richborough once was. 2,000 years ago, this windswept site was at the very heart of Roman Britain. And this bare concrete foundation once supported one of the wonders of the empire.
It would have been seen for miles and miles and miles around. It was there to be seen. It was the great symbol. It would have been a very useful sea mark. It would have guided people to Richborough.
It would tower on the horizon for a long part of your crossing, and covered in white marble glinting in the sun. It's sort of the speck on the horizon growing as you approach it. It would just have an enormous effect on people.
Britons who saw this for the first time would just be overawed by it. The sheer bulk and splendour of the thing would knock them out. They would realise suddenly what it meant to be part of the Roman Empire.
The whole idea of hewing out stone, carving it, and most of all making something that could be just honorific, just impressive, just a statement, was something really entirely new.
What we understand about Richborough is a microcosm about what we understand about Roman Britain. It's a site that is occupied from the first invasion right through to the final withdrawal. And the more we can understand about it, I think the more we'll understand about Roman Britain as a whole.